Welcome back, everyone. I'm Massimo Rigotti, and this is the Sober Method podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Chris Rogers, certified recovery coach, founder of Rebooted Teen, and a man who's turned his own recovery from compulsive behaviors into a mission helping parents and families break generational cycles of addiction and digital dependence. We're going to talk about what real family confidence looks like when successful parents quietly battle their own patterns while wondering if their kids are suffering in silence. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you very, very much for having me.
You're very welcome. Well, Chris, you built a life that looked successful on the outside, but you were battling a lot of compulsive behaviors on the inside. Could you take a moment and walk us back to the beginning, like how you realized that the old coping wasn't working?
Absolutely. Well, again, my name is Chris Rogers. I was already roasted for being a Mets fan, but say love it, right? But no, I am so passionate about this because it has made an impact on my life. I'll give you the long story short as far as who I am, where I come from. So here's the thing. I remember being 14 and not really knowing who I could turn to when it came to questions about what I'll call corn. And that's the topic of discussion for today. And even just saying the word will likely inspire some feelings of, are they really talking about that? Like, it seems to be this stigmatized, swept under the rug world that we often pretend doesn't exist until it ultimately affects us, right? Which is why conversations about it, I believe, are important. Having, dealt with a compulsive behavior in this world for a very long time, I remember feeling like I couldn't open up about it because of how stigmatized and shame inducing it overall was. And what I have built and what I've documented, not only my own recovery journey, but what I've built from the ground up and I'm very excited about is what I call, as you said, the Rebooted Teen Program. It combines a bunch of hats that I've worn in my life, one being a rebooted man, but also being a teacher. A fun fact, I was a teacher in Manhattan for the better part of a decade, and now I'm coaching full time. But with this generation that this program is targeting, these are my people. Like this is my world. It's been my world for a long time. And we're talking about a very special generation, just in the sense of when we use the phrase, even with the best intentions, when I was your age, when trying to lend a helping hand, what we got to understand for those of us in an older generation, it doesn't apply as neatly perhaps as it once does because of the boom in things like technology, social media, and of course, corn. So it's really about meeting a young person where they're at, getting to what is it that they do want? Because one thing that I've learned, and as I'm sure as you've spoken about with your guests on the show, the world of compulsive behaviors, regardless of the behavior or substance, it's not the thing, it's the place from which it's coming from. And that's the star of the show in the program. That's what we're talking about. So that's something that I'm really, really passionate about. And that's the long story short of who I am and what I got going on.
Well, that's a lot. And I do appreciate it being here in Nebraska that we're referring it to as corn. Yes, it seems very
Yes.
fitting.
There you go.
My. So you've spoken obviously very openly about your journey. You just shared things from your teenage years. And so did they just like suddenly show up, these compulsive behaviors? Or do you think that there was something deeper rooted back, even when you were 5 or 6 years old that just kind of set you up to be in this situation once you became a teenager?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because when we use the term compulsive behaviors, just to break it down in its most simplest form, because some people might ask, like, how do I know if I'm addicted to corn, right? Like, or someone I know, how do I know if they're addicted or not? And we know something is compulsive when there's the thought in our mind where we want to stop, but we just can't. Like the muscle memory has been that embedded that it's become the new normal, right? So to be able to break away from that particular pattern doesn't compute. That's how you know, okay, I want to stop because it's getting in the way of my potential, getting in the way of my relationships, perhaps in my own circumstances, even in the way of my career, in the way, just me being my best self, just to put it simply. But I couldn't, you know? And that's how I knew that, like, oh, wow, this has gotten a hold of me. And what I am a huge advocate for is really the art form of conversations. Because what I do also in what's called the Rebooted Teen Parent Program for parents out there who might have a child who they suspect is having a compulsive relationship with corn, you know? How do I get started with conversations like these without inflicting or starting with a sense of shame or making things awkward or uncomfortable? Because understandably, it can be. But again, what is the most important thing? It's not the problematic behavior, it's your child, you know? So that's a lot of what we talk about. But as far as my own behavior goes, again, I knew it was something that had proven to be a problem for me when I realized that I couldn't stop even if I tried, or at least on my own. Eventually, I found a program that radically changed my life, and here I am in my own way paying it forward, for anybody who might be feeling like they're in that place of feeling out of control or just feeling like they're suffering in silence, like you alluded to. I know what that's like, and so many people I've spoken to know what that's like. But I also know that healing is possible, hope is possible, and that's the star of the show. That's what we're here to focus on.
Yeah. Well, you just touched on parents, and that's an important point. Most of the listeners to this podcast are the high performing that are struggling themselves, and addiction and compulsion tend to be a little bit hereditary. There's enough of it that I would say that it definitely exists. And so what patterns might someone notice within themselves as an adult to be starting to question, maybe I need to have a conversation with my kid?
Mm. Well, as far as some red flags to look out for, and by the way, even before I go into them, any of these red flags or things to look out for that I mentioned, it's not an opportunity to freak out. It's not a matter of like, oh, your child has gone off the deep end. It's just a series of opportunities to start a conversation. That's all this is, right? And if it happens to apply for you, great. Which might sound strange, but great. It's an opportunity for you to open up a dialogue and get curious about it. And we'll talk about that in a second. But as far as some basic things to look out for, how do I know that my child might be watching porn? Or how do I know if my child might be involved in a compulsive behavior? Meaning they want to stop, but they can't. Three categories that I break it into: a behavioral, social, and technological. So, behavioral, for example, like, do you notice that there's some secrecy when it comes to their device usage? Don't look at my phone, don't touch my iPad, like, do you notice that even the language they use when they're speaking to you or their friends or their siblings, has it become over sexualized? You know, does it seem kind of mature beyond their years? Just things to keep your antennas up about. Again, not like all the red flags persist and, red alert, an opportunity to open up a conversation. So those are the behavioral examples. Social, one thing that I always try to like keep an eye out for is the sense of cynicism, you know, a sense of maybe negativity or pessimism when it comes to things like love or relationships or even sex, men, women, marriage, like it's just something to just kind of keep an ear and an eye out for. As far as technological cues on your child's device, for example, if they have one, do they have multiple apps for chatting or web browsing? I mean, we talk about this in the parent program, apps to look out for that, while seemingly innocent on the surface, have been known to have adult content kind of slip through the cracks. I'll call out a few, things like TikTok, for example, YouTube, Discord, Snapchat is arguably the biggest one. It's just being aware of what is on your child's device or devices, right? And I'm sure we can dive into, whether or not a young child should have a device. Maybe that's a separate conversation. But yeah, again, there are opportunities to open up a conversation. So those are just some of the first few sort of things to look out for that come to mind.
Sure. Well, I mean, and for any parent, I would think that there would be perhaps even their own sense of fear and shame in once they realize that there's a challenge. And especially if they're someone who is a leader themselves or somebody that has some social standing, and to recognize I have an issue here and how do I deal with it? So how do you help a parent some of that to effectively lead their child out of that challenge?
Understanding that I'm sure anybody who listens to this or watches this knows what I'm about to say in a logical sense. So maybe I'm speaking to an emotional part of them, right? The expectation is not to be perfect. The expectation is not to be Superman or Wonder Woman, right? The point of the matter is your child, in their own way, wants to know, can they trust you? Can they lean on you? Can you hold them down? And again, what's the star of the show? It's not the thing, it's the place from which it's coming from. That's the target. That's the thing to get curious about. But to be fair, I'll point out, like a high achieving parent, right, where, they're crushing it in their career. They have, like you said, some social standing, they have a reputation, and having spoken to, people in those communities, I mean, people that I speak to all around the world that perhaps might present themselves a certain way or are known a certain way in front of, the world, and then behind closed doors, they might be struggling with, some out of control behaviors in their own life, right?
Hmm.
Completely common and, but not without hope. Again, I can understand not wanting to be a hypocrite. I can understand not wanting to be in this place of like, do as I say, not as I do. You know, when it comes to accountability, which is really what we're talking about, how can I advocate for my child's well being? Now that I know I don't need to be perfect, all right, cool. What do I have to do? What does your child want? Just to break it down, like one of the first exercises that I would do with a young person, and we talk about this in the Rebooted Teen Program, so a little sneak peek, I suppose. There's an exercise I like to call the park bench exercise. So, long story short, your young client would pretend to sit on a park bench, beautiful sunny day. It's a beautiful day, a little chilly for my liking, but still kind of nice. You're out there in the park, and then a minute or two later, somebody comes and sits next to you on this park bench. You look over, you realize that the person that came to sit next to you is you, about a year and a half, 2 years into the future, fully rebooted. That means no longer reliant upon compulsive behaviors, but is living the kind of life that they actually want to live. So the goal is to have a conversation, have a dialogue with that particular part. It's just like, "Oh my gosh, like, I have so many questions to ask you, like, how are you feeling? Like, what have you got going on? What's important to you?" Right? And the goal is to put pen to paper and document that conversation. Why does this matter so much? As a coach, like, if you were my client right now, I can't tell you what's important to you. How can I do that? It has to come from you, because what's the target? Not so much what do I don't want? It's what do I want? Like the formula is not simply let me do X instead of Y. That's not recovery. That's just merely sobriety, right? Which is a piece of the puzzle, but not the entire image. You know what I'm saying? Because as we know, like recovery is an inside out job. So while I'm doing away with the compulsive behavior, that's a healthy thing to the body, but what does the spirit require? Meaning, what type of person do I need to be in order to live the life I want to live? To the point where any past compulsive behavior no longer has a place in it. Not out of a place of running from the dark, but like running toward that light. That's the goal. So, bringing it back to the parent and child example, it's getting curious about that. And that's a great exercise to do. What does their future self on the park bench want? So that when it comes time to be accountable, you know what specifically to hold them accountable to. You get to hold them to what it is that they say that they want. as an accountability partner, as a parent, as a guardian, you're not just trying to play like relapse goalie. Like that's not necessarily your job, right? You know, if what we're trying to build in a young person's demeanor and lifestyle is that sense of self-awareness, that sense of self-advocacy, you start there. What is it that you want, you know, and what is it going to take for you to get there? What is it that you need? It's about holding them to those things, you know? It's like that's where boundaries come into play. That's what standards really are. I like to think of it as sort of like bumpers in a game of bowling. Like, why do they exist? It's like keep you out of the gutter, yes, but to also keep you. Let me take it back. They're there to have you have the thing that you want to hit easier to hit. You know what I mean? So that's. I know there's a whole lot there, but just to tie it with a bow, what can a parent do? It's focus on what does your child want? Beyond their compulsive behavior, it's like, what is the kind of life that they themselves want to lead? What do they need? What's important to them? And if you notice that it doesn't include a certain compulsive behavior, then that's something to point out. But it's not a matter of like, don't do that. That's
Yes.
not, you know what I'm saying? It's values driven decisions. That's the skill that we want to build and foster in a young person. We can talk about filters, we can talk about blockers, and those are great practical places to start. But let's say once your child leaves the house and maybe they're quote unquote free range, you know, do they have that muscle memory to make those values based decisions? You know, those are the types of skills that we want to instill. It's not just about don't watch corn. It's a matter of like that park bench. You know, what are
Sure.
you doing today to bring that park bench you to life?
I mean, and really what you're saying is, well, a couple things. First of all, you're looking for a conversation that is completely open, doesn't attach any shame to it, and then focuses on the child having their own view of what their values are and providing an environment for that to take place. And since you've mentioned it, I'm just rebooted teen so many times here. Rebootedteen.com, is that the best place for people to get started with you?
Yeah. That's where you'll find the free Rebooted Teen Parent Program. So if you're curious as to literally how do I get started with these conversations, that's my gift to you. Feel free to check it out where we talk about conversation starters, other red flags to look out for, practical ways to get started. And if you're getting a lot of value from that, and once you practice it and are really seeing some success and want to take your coaching to the next level, then I would highly recommend the Rebooted Teen Program. But that would be a great place to start. For some samples, you can check out at Rebooted Teen on Instagram. But yes, that's where you can get started.
All right, fantastic. So as we have been going through all of this, I really like that values driven, those value driven decisions and being able to frame something up. Actually, what you're doing with these teenagers is providing them a framework that can last them a lifetime. It's not something that's just going to be, a one and done and, suddenly I'm 20 and this doesn't matter. I mean, you're actually laying down some sound foundational work with them that will help them with their mental health long term. So let me ask you, what behavior has maybe surprised you the most in what small daily change you've seen people make that nets a huge result that was like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen?
Self awareness is medicinal. You know, like when it comes to being so intentional about what's going on internally to the point where it's affecting me externally. A lot of the exercises that we talk about in the program really center around that. Really, before we get super practical as far as what you can do in the middle of an urge, it's about really knowing yourself better than you know anything else, but also understanding that that in itself is going to be a process. It's very, very common for someone to have a compulsive behavior because they don't want to do that for various reasons. I don't want to sit with this particular feeling. I don't want to process this particular trauma or memory or hurt or whatever's going on, that in itself is a process. But one of my favorite exercises that I talk about, and I'll describe it briefly, I used the word dialogue earlier. It comes from the world of internal family systems. I call the exercise dialogue, where you literally take out a notebook and a piece of paper and you have a scripted out conversation between yourself and, as George Collins, he's a corn and addiction counselor. He wrote a fantastic book called Breaking the Cycle. Really changed my perspective on a lot of things, including my own recovery process. Super awesome book, highly recommend. But basically, what you do is you have a conversation between yourself and what George Collins would call a sub personality. So, for example, your addict self. Understanding that, just think of the word sub personality. It's a part of you, it's not the entirety of you. And I love it so much. And it's really graspable and broken down because it proves a couple things. You are not this urge or compulsion, and it is not you. So, literally, like, I will write down in a notebook, like, Chris, and I'll just like write a thought. And then maybe addict Chris will write something else. You literally have a conversation with that part of you. Because up until now, a lot of the what do you do? Like, distract yourself. What do you do? Read a book, do some push ups, take a cold shower. It's like, okay, great. That might get you out of a jam and, like, make your body calm down a little bit. But there's still that thing. And that's the thing that's going to persist. And what you persist, or sorry, what you will, my goodness, what you resist will persist. First day with a new tongue. So when you're doing a dialoguing exercise, you are naming the emotion, you're validating it by literally giving it a name and listening to it, and you are feeling it. That's a note from Dr. Jessica Eastman, neuropathic doctor and also a trauma-informed recovery coach. Absolute OG. Shout out to Jessica. Yeah, I love this exercise because you separate yourself from that urge without shaming it, without suppressing it, without making yourself feel bad for it or beating yourself up. Oh, I shouldn't have these thoughts. Oh, how dare I? I'm such a bad person because I want to act out in a certain way. It's about separating yourself from it. Think of it this way. Let's say you're getting home from work or school after a long day. You plop on the couch. You can finally just chill. You get a knock on the door. You open up the door, and the person that's there is someone you're not exactly a fan of. So whoever the first person that popped into your head was, that's who's at the door right now. Now, in this situation, right, you got two different options. You can either go, ugh, slam the door in their face, or you can invite them in for a few minutes and ask why they came to visit you at all. Dialoguing is about choosing option number two. It's giving a thought or emotion the space to tell you what they want. Your nervous system is simply trying to tell you something. It's an opportunity to get to know yourself a little bit better. Beyond the compulsive behavior, what is it that you want? But the best part is, because it's your house, you have the final say in when it's time for them to leave, right? So it's an empowering thing. And I've seen when, clients practice this exercise, again, that self-awareness piece, what's going on internally to the point where it's affecting me externally. And sitting with those particular urges or emotions without suppressing them, numbing them out, or running away, you're getting to know really who you are. And I'll tie it with a bow with this as a personal example. When I was first acting out and, finding myself down compulsive roads, one of the things that my addict subpersonality wanted was a sense of control. When I was a teenager and discovering corn for the first time, at the time, my house life was a little, chaotic. My parents were headed toward a separation and a divorce and everything. So I felt like I didn't have a lot of control over my external circumstances. I felt like I was powerless. Like, what I said or what I felt didn't matter. It wouldn't have an effect. It's like I wanted to do something about the situation, but I just couldn't. Right. Now, here I had this behavior where, in my own way, even when it proved to be unhealthy for me in various ways, it was something that I could control, right? It was something that wasn't going to judge me. It was something that, you know, provided an escape from that. So, beyond the behavior itself, that's the thing that I wanted. That sense of safety, that sense of control, that sense of like, everything's gonna be okay. That's what I wanted. And through doing this kind of work, I went on to discover that and other realizations like that for myself. I've seen it happen with me and I've seen it happen with countless others.
And ultimately, you're changing your own wiring by doing that work
Exactly.
because
You're
then
changing the relationship with that feeling. That's exactly what it is.
you're not actively trying to think about the wiring. All you're doing is making the sound decision that this is what I want. So you start choosing that decision over what was not previously the easy decision to make.
Correct.
Maybe the best way to put that.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, Chris, that's some great advice. So, everyone listening, I've got a sober move that I want you to try this week. First of all, I want you to observe one moment this week when your nervous system reacts to something that your teen or your child does. That flash of fear, anger, or urge to control or avoid a conversation. And I want you to notice it without judgment and name that old pattern. And behavior, I want you to pause and I want you to ask yourself, am I reacting from my own unresolved wiring or am I leading from the parent I want to be? And then I want you to choose one small, calm, shame free response instead. And then finally, I want you to execute that new response at least 3 times this week and pay attention to how those conversations with your child go. Does the relationship feel different? And maybe that will help interrupt the old cycle. Well, Chris, we have a tradition on this podcast where each guest answers a question from my last guest. And then after answering, we're going to get your question from my next guest.
I'm ready.
George Haymaker left this question for you. What is your mental experience costing you?
Wow. What is my mental experience costing me? Man, I'd love to ask George some follow up questions, but what comes to mind immediately, what are my mental experience costing me? My mental experience is costing me, what comes to mind is my sense of presence, I suppose. You know, like what comes to mind for me, how that question strikes me is like if I find myself, very involved in my work, for example, because, beyond working as a coach, I'm also a musician. I'm also very involved in my church and everything. Obviously, I have, Rebooted Teen. Like, I'm a very involved person, right? And sometimes, when I am very much in that zone, one thing that I need to be very intentional about is my sense of presence in my relationships and, making sure that there's time set aside for rest. Holy moly. Like that, this sense, especially for, you mentioned the word high achiever, very, very common to have this irrational belief that rest is selfish. Rest
Yes.
is hello, like, rest is impossible, like, really making a really solid intention on that sense of rest, and just holding myself accountable. I went to, Roosevelt Island
Okay.
in, Manhattan the other day. That's where my old school used to be. It was a beautiful day, cherry blossoms were blooming. I had a gap in my day, and rather than, "Alright, I have all this time to do work," I was like, "Wait, wait, hang on a second. I gotta fill my own cup so that I have enough to fill others," and it was just what the doctor ordered. It was a great day.
Yeah.
So, as far as, what my mental state is costing me, when I'm not actively taking care of it, it can cost me my sense of presence, and
Yeah.
that bleeds into so many different aspects of life.
That's an awesome answer. I mean, I knew that was going to be a tough one. So now it's your turn. What
Yeah.
stumper do you have? What question do you want to leave for my next guest?
I don't know about a stumper, but here's the thing, if you're going to dive into a world like recovery, dive into a world like coaching or counseling or facilitation in some way in this particular world, it has to matter a great deal to you. Otherwise, why would you do it? You know what I mean? So I suppose the question I would want to ask somebody in this field, because I think it would arguably matter more than whatever degrees they might have or certifications. Why does this matter so much to you?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Well, I can't wait to hear the answer. This is a fun handoff, I tell you. I really enjoy hearing the responses.
A really cool tradition. I love that.
So, Chris, you get the final 30 seconds. Any words of wisdom for anyone out there or anything else you want to tie a bow on for us? The floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me. This was a great conversation. For anyone who's listening, if you have any other questions or you're curious to learn more, you can find me at Rebooted Teen on Instagram. RebootedTeen.com is where you can find the free Rebooted Teen Parent Program, as well as if you think it's the right move for you and your family, then I highly recommend the Rebooted Teen Program itself. But at the end of the day, remember what the mission is. It's not to be perfect, but to advocate for your child's own development, self advocacy, and self awareness. You're not alone. Hope is possible. Healing is real. Recovery is possible. And just like how all the best athletes in the world have coaches, that's where a coach comes into play. I'm never going to tell a parent how to be a parent. I want to give you the tools and the verbiage necessary in order to have you do your extremely important job better. So if you're curious to learn more, you know where to find me.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. To everyone listening, keep fighting for yourself and don't stop because the pressure hits. I'm Massimo Rigotti. This is the Sober Method Podcast. Please like, follow, subscribe, leave a review. And if this touched you, share it with someone who you know needs it. Your future is sober.